Hello and welcome to our fourth installment of our Christmas discussions. Today I thought we'd talk about the Nativity set as well as the Nativity uh, plays. They've been around for thousands of years. As a matter of fact, the plays themselves can go all the way back to at least the 1100s or even earlier. We know for a fact, though, that the first nativity set was put together by St. Francis of Assisi, and he used various materials. We don't know what the first set was completely made out of, but it would have been local artisans and it would have been made to suit. And it could have even been life size. Now, nativity sets have been a part of the church as well as private devotions for, once again, hundreds and thousands of years, going all the way back to St. Francis as far as the smaller sets that we all have in our houses. Now, a nativity set can be the full blown, everybody's invited set where you have the camels and you have the sheep and the shepherds and the wise men and obviously the angel and possibly a star, but it can be as simple as just Joseph, Mary, and the baby. That is, of course, a creche, which is just another word for nativity. Now, I found when I moved to the East Coast that there is a tradition that was not part of the tradition that I grew up in Arkansas, which is that the baby is not put in the manger scene until Christmas Eve at the Christmas Eve service. And now this has actually caused great anxiety in me as a minister and as an adult because I'm the one they always put in charge of Jesus. And so I'm constantly worried, where have I put him? Where is he now? What have I done? And I until Christmas Eve when I get to finally put Jesus in the manger set, I'm kind of a nervous wreck. And this is not just me. One of my predecessors here at Trinity, Reverend Pender, John Pender, one time had baby Jesus sitting on the organ and somehow dropped it behind the organ. And they had to do all kinds of things to try to get the baby out from under the organ so that they could put the baby in the creche on Christmas Eve. As a matter of fact, John Pender's the reason that they superglued Jesus to the manger that they had. Now, one of the other funny things about our manger sets that we use here in America, especially, is the fact that they're very Western European. The barn that you find Jesus in is the same kind of barn that my grandfather built in Oklahoma. It looks the same, but that's not the barns of the Middle East, especially 2,000 years ago. The barn back at that time would have been in the basement of the house. And so it was just a kind of the dugout below the house. And you didn't have 20 cows, you didn't have goats, you had just a few animals. It was a family situation. And you need to remember that when Mary goes to Bethlehem and winds up in the barn because there's no room in the inn, there's a couple of things that we need to understand about that. The first is that in order for it to be said there's no room at the inn, that means that the innkeeper had already given up his own bed. He was already sleeping on a table or a floor. By the rules of hospitality at that time, he would not have done that. He also sees that Mary is obviously in pain and is obviously about to give birth. And so he thinks to himself, where can I put her where she can have some privacy, where she can be warm, where she can have this child and it not be a fiasco? Well, he sends her to the barn. He sends her under the house where she and her husband can have some privacy. Now, the reality is that if you think about it, there would have been probably at least a midwife, probably half the neighborhood was there because that's how birthing was then and how birthing is today. I mean, it's very rarely is it just the doctor, the nurse, and the wife or the husband. There winds up sometimes being video cameras and all kinds of paraphernalia. Well, that's kind of where Mary was stuck in all of this thing. It was her first child. She's a young girl. And so somebody in that inn, probably in that neighborhood, was an experienced midwife. And so they would have been there. There would have been, Joseph probably was kicked outside having to walk around the well or something. Who knows where Joseph was? But that's really the nature of all of this. We also wind up once again having kind of a misidea of what all's going on as far as all the people and all the places and all the things that are going on. We really don't know, but chances are that night, later after Jesus had been born and after the shepherds had their experience with the angels, which is a whole different discussion, that the shepherds come into town, and by now it would have been known, hey, there's this young woman, she's just given birth, she's over here at the inn. And so finding Jesus wouldn't have been that complicated. They would have found Jesus fairly easy. And then they celebrate and they have this great time. And so by the time morning comes around, Joseph's worn out, Mary's worn out, the baby's worn out, and that's where we are. Now, the reality also is that according to what we believe and according to tradition, the wise men didn't show up until probably 2 years later. They're not really part of the nativity scene of that night. As a matter of fact, in Matthew, when sent to find Jesus, they knock on the front door. It's at the house where Mary and Joseph have been living. And so it is from that setting that they pay homage to Jesus, and then they go on their merry way. Now, this also kind of brings up kind of a fun subject of, well, how come we know there's 3 wise men? Well, we don't. We have no idea how many wise men there were. Could have been 2, could have been 100. We don't know. The reason we say 3 wise men is because they mention 3 gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So that's where the 3 comes from. It doesn't come from the naming of the wise men. It doesn't come from any other material other than the fact that 3 gifts are mentioned, 3 wise men. And of course, there have been traditions that have been built up about the wise men as well that you can look into. But the reality is that they are astronomers from the east. So the star is in the west. Got to keep that in mind. They are from the east and they are going west to find Jesus. An interesting thing that sometimes we kind of lose perspective on. So once again, this is something that has been a part of our tradition going way back thousands of years as far as celebrating the nativity itself. As a matter of fact, there's a beautiful service that many of us do on Christmas Eve called the Service of the Nativity, where each of the players in the nativity set is given their amount of time and talked about. So I hope these have been fun little discussions. I'm going to do one more later in this week, try to get us up to Christmas Eve. And if you got any comments or any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. Once again, remember, whatever you write is there for posterity. So be polite and remember that you have an audience. Hope you're having a good Christmas season. I am about a week behind, but I hope to do another one of these, like I said, in the next day or two to catch us up. And then there'll be, I'll do one after Christmas, between Christmas and New Year's, and then we'll be back on to doing it every week, one way or the other. So if you have any comments or if you have any suggestions about topics you'd like to discuss or hear me ramble about, feel free to let me know. Otherwise, I hope you're having a good week, and we will see you next time.